And joining me for an exclusive interview is Gabrielle Kessler, and we're talking about her film, The Prison Show. Good morning, Gabrielle.
Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and yourself?
Great, great. I'm very happy to be on your show.
So let's talk about the actual production of the film. You started filming in 2012, correct?
So in 2012 is when I first came to Houston. It was my first time even in Texas. And I filmed a little bit. But it was more for myself to kind of test out this idea for a film, to see what kind of footage I would get. But that's when I decided, by visiting the prison show, that I wanted to make a film about it. And so after that first trip is when I started looking for funding to help me see the film through.
How much approximately did it cost to do the film?
It cost. I'm a co-producer, but I actually had a production company, and their job is really dealing with the finances. But I would say in the end, it cost probably a little under 150,000 euros.
And some of the funding came from overseas, from France.
A lot of the funding, actually, I'd say the majority of it came from overseas. So the way funding worked is, after that first trip, I started applying for grants, and I got a few French grants, and one of them allowed me to come back to Houston in 2016, so 4 years after that first trip, to shoot a little bit for 10 days, to make a trailer from that, and to use that to fundraise. And thanks to that, I got another grant from the Jerome Foundation, and that allowed me to go back and to film. It wasn't a huge grant, so I had to do some of the filming myself. I had a Houston-based DP, cinematographer, who did some of the filming, but I just didn't have enough to hire him full-time, so I had to get behind the camera for some of that. And then I came back to France after that, so I filmed in 2017, 2018. And it had been just so much work kind of carrying this film up until then that even though I also work as an editor, I knew I needed somebody else in the edit room with me. I needed that fresh pair of eyes. And so for that's again, more money that you need. And so the film, I kept applying to grants. I'd get pretty far along in the process, but I just never made it through. And finally, luckily, a French broadcaster came on board in 2024, and that allowed us to pay for the edit. And after that, I decided I wanted to do a Kickstarter to raise money to really finish the film properly, to put it into the final stages, which is color correction, and in particular for a really good sound mix, because my film is about a radio. And so for me, the sound was an essential aspect, and I really wanted to create a world of sound and give the film texture. And those are really expensive phases for any filmmaking process. So I did a Kickstarter for that last spring, and that turned out to be a huge success. I think people were really touched about the prison show's story, about this radio show. And it was great because it was like the audience was greenlighting the film. And so we raised money, and I was able to really complete the film that way, and it was broadcast on French television in September of 2024.
The Prison Show, the film, explores the legacy of the Prison Show radio show, which started on KPFT in 1980.
That's right, yeah, Ray Hill's work.
And Ray Hill started that. He passed away in 2017, but you had time to film him as well as his successors.
Yeah, he actually passed away in November of 2018.
Okay.
So he was a big part of the filming process because the film focuses on the prison show and on Execution Watch. It's true that when I filmed, Ray Hill had already retired, and it was Hank Lamb and Tanika Solomon who were hosting. David Collingsworth was producing, and he's still the producer, co-host today of the prison show. So it's not a film about Ray Hill. It's really about the work it's the way that he used radio to humanize, I would say, the prisoners and their families.
Because a lot of these people who are incarcerated, they don't have access to phones. And so listening to this radio show was the only way some of them could communicate through the show to their families.
Yeah, well, when Ray started the show, actually, there were no phones in prisons. This was the only way. And Ray always told the story of how it happened accidentally. He was doing a film that was for prisoners. I don't think he had considered much that the families or that their loved ones were part of the audience. And then one day he got a call of someone who called who had a flat tire on the road, who was calling from a payphone, and who said, "Oh, Ray, can you please let my son know that I'm not going to be able to visit him tomorrow?" And Ray said, "You know what, ma'am? You're going to tell her. You're going to tell your son, you're going to tell him." And so he put that woman on the show, and that was it. The next week, the phones were ringing with people who wanted to pass on messages. And that's how he, the audience, I think, of his show kind of manifested itself. And then I don't have the date in mind, but somewhere in the 2000s, thanks to the prison show's work, they pushed to get phones into prisons, and were successful. And as he said, he was worried that it would put the prison show out of work, but people still kept on calling, because it's still not that easy. You cannot make calls into a prison. It's the prisoners who can call you. So this is still a way of, having somebody hear your voice. And I think when you're on the inside, hearing the sounds of home, hearing a message of love is just such a powerful message. And to any of us who are listening in, there's this sort of intimacy. It almost makes me feel sometimes guilty for listening in. And you have the same people who call in week after week, so you follow their stories of these wives or these daughters or these mothers, and you hear their own personal stories, and it's really moving and very special to be a part of that.
Since there was such a long time in production, how did your vision for the film change during the course of filming?
It actually, I don't think did. I think what really changed in my vision was the research part, was between the time when I first found out about the prison show, and I found out about the prison show kind of accidentally. It was late one night. I was doing kind of a deep dive on the internet, as one does, and I was reading about women who get married to people on death row. And I stumbled onto the prison show and the weddings. At that time, Texas allowed proxy weddings with prisoners, meaning that they don't have to be present at their own wedding. And so the prison show was doing these weddings on the radio, where the prisoner was listening to his wedding as he was in behind bars listening to it happening. And I just thought, wow, what is this show? And I started reading about it and reading about Ray Hill, and I read this interview with Ray Hill where he said, it's been 30-something years, I can't remember the exact date, since I've been released, but I'm still in there. And that sentence, which is actually the same sentence that opens up my film, I couldn't understand it. I thought, wow, you were in prison so many years ago, and for 4 years, which sure, it's a long time, but I would have thought, it's something that you do, and I wanted to understand the trauma. And then when I came to Houston a few months later, and I got to know the people working on the prison show, and I heard their stories, I just, and it sounds naive now because I think now there's a lot more conversations about mass incarceration and about the criminal justice system. But at that time, I just didn't know that if you were convicted of a felony in Texas, you weren't allowed to vote, or that when you were released, you weren't eligible for certain jobs, or that you couldn't stay with your family in public housing. And all of a sudden, I just started learning how hard it is to readapt to society, and how really, if you don't have people on the outside who are supporting you and rooting for you, I mean, we're not helping to rehabilitate prisoners at all. And so from there, I think I was able to see the purpose of the prison show in a much clearer way, and that was the film I wanted to make. And as much as there were maybe stories that I heard that surprised me, and I think even along the way, I just couldn't believe some of the things I've learned about the conditions on death row and the way people are treated. And, I'll always be surprised by the unfairness of many aspects of it. I don't know that, the way I feel about the prison show hasn't changed. I still really admire their work in the same way.
And the prison show will be screening in Houston at the DeLuxe Theatre this coming Tuesday night, Tuesday, June 3rd.
That's right. At 7:30, I'll be there. Many people who work on the show or who have worked on the show will also be there, and I'm really excited because over the years I've heard so many people who live in the Houston area who tell me what the show means to them without it necessarily even having a loved one behind bars. They'll say, when I'm driving late at night, like it's happened on a Friday night, I'm driving and all of a sudden on the radio I hear these messages, and you get sucked into this like really privileged moment, this privileged one-sided conversation that you get to listen in on. And I think it does really expand your vision of it, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about the prison show, too. It's not just that they're providing the service to people who are behind bars. I think that they're also educating audiences that, it's so easy to think, these are criminals behind bars, but that's only part of the story. It's not just that. It's also that these are people who are really loved, and perhaps they did something bad. I think there's varying degrees to what can get you behind bars. But these are human beings, and we as a society, I think, suffer for it if we're dehumanizing them.
And listeners who are interested can tune in to the prison show on KPFT 90.1 FM. It's on Friday nights, 9 to 11, I believe.
Exactly, yep.
And you previously screened the film at the Austin Film Festival, which is where I became aware of it. That was last October. How did that screening go?
It was amazing. Actually, every screening we've had has been really wonderful because, and it's kind of what I want for the film. It's that when it's people who, aren't directly affected by the criminal justice system, to get them to kind of think about what are prisons for? Because, there's, what are we using them for? Are we using them only to punish, or are we using them to rehabilitate? And I think the scene also on execution watch and the death penalty, that screening was really special to me because I had a very good friend who was there who said that for the first time she started reconsidering the death penalty. And, I obviously I have opinions, but I tried to make the film in a way that I'm not, I don't think I'm just preaching to the choir. I'd like to get conversation going about some of these questions because I think they're very complicated questions, and I think that they merit a lot of conversation and reflection, and I really hope that that would be a takeaway from the film, is just, to start talking about these subjects.
Gabrielle, thank you very much for your time, and best of luck on the screening this coming Tuesday night, which, of course, is open to the public, too.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, have a great day.
All right. Thanks, you too.